Hey guys, what's going on? It's the Commissioner, Rising Legend 13 here, and I'm going to be doing something new. We're going to be doing a VoD review of the first playoff match, Kid versus Dan, the grudge match, as people like to call it. And we're just going to go through some of the tactics people have used, some of the techs that I want to enlighten people on, and just my overall thoughts of what was a really, really good opening set. So, let's begin. Round 1 in Echo, there is not much to talk about. Echo is new to the Overwatch 1v1 League, and I'm not going to claim I know everything about her techs, but here's a few things I can say. So Kid sees Dan in the upper balcony over here, so he's hard engaging right now. Dan, meanwhile, doesn't know he's there until he goes around the corner and sees him. So once they start engaging, it's all about cursor placement, of course. Dan wins out on that. But then Dan makes a critical mistake and cancels his laser beam. So the thing to know about Echo's laser, obviously, if you're under 50% HP, you will burn down the target very fast. So in an Echo 1v1, it is critical that you get your opponent under 50% HP first, because if you don't, you're about to get boomed. So now onto the stuff that I want to talk about. In the second round of this map, we have Sigma. And so Dan takes a defensive position here, and Kid is engaging on him. First of all, you can see Kid places his barrier much closer to Dan than Dan places his barrier to Kid. This allows for two things. One, if Kid pushes up, he's less likely to get rebound on by grenades. You can see if Dan shoots to the right here, he's going to hit Dan with the Kid with a rebound. If Kid shoots around the shield, if Dan moves to Kid's right, he can get some rebounds. So shield placement is always key, because you always want to either poke down the shield as much as possible, or poke down your opponent, depending on what situation you're given with the shields. Right now, because there aren't many angles for both of them to take, you'd probably be looking at both of them taking shield pressure. And so if we unpause here, you can see they both try and get the rebounds. And they're both doing pretty paltry damage. I mean, 7 versus 27. You know, it's okay to get poke damage, but if you're doing that much, you should be really focusing on burning down your opponent's shield. So now you can see, look, Kid is in the lead on shield health. He has 780 versus Dan's 625. So if we continue this... Oh, my bad. If we continue this, see Dan's shield is cracked first. Kid is winning the poke battle here. Dan starts to retreat and realizes he needs to poke in the shield too. Kid puts his shield out, which is obviously higher. Dan tries to rock. I assume he was thinking that Kid would put his shield down, or he's trying to get more poke, which both are acceptable forms of trying to win this war. So now, Dan's shield has gone down here. And Kid realizes this and starts to go aggressive. Dan realizes this and starts to back away. Kid hits the rock as he chases, and now he's in a much better position. He takes all of the shields off Dan now, so permanent health damage. So now watch how Dan turns this around. First of all, he absorbs at the right time when he's expecting Kid to shoot out because Kid's on the offensive. Kid absorbs afterwards, but doesn't get the same amount because Dan's expecting an absorb right after his absorb. Now you can see that Dan's shield is at 589, while Kid can put his shield out, which he's about to do, but it's not out right now. So now he puts the shield out. He does actually have the shield advantage. But Dan can walk straight in front of the shield, which he does, and rocks Kid to the face. And now Kid is in a desperate situation. There's a shield in front of him. He's low on health. He puts his shield out too far, and then he gets beamed. So that's one thing to always think about your Sigma play. Where you place the shield, and if it's actually benefiting you. As we move on here to Junkrat, and this is something I'll get into in the honor analysis. Both of them kind of camp.
That's a good spot.
And when you're camping, you're specifically doing one thing. Listening for footsteps. But I want you to listen to the audio in the background for a second. You can hear all the creaking and the water. Black Forest is actually a unique map because its ambient sounds are like footsteps or can juke you into thinking they're like footsteps, and they're also louder than any other ambient noise in any other map. So when you're trying to camp, especially in this middle part that Kid is, it can be very hard to distinguish whether someone is walking up on you or not. And you can see Dan is crouch walking right here to make sure that Kid can't hear him. And so when they're both doing this camping, they're really trying to find out information. Problem is, this can backfire, because if you don't hear the footsteps, like Kid might, someone can run up on you, ambush you when you're not expecting it, and completely boom you. The rest of this... Okay, so getting into Orisa, there's going to be a few techs that we'll be going over that both players use. They're just useful to know in Orisa battles. So of course you place down the shield, you start doing poke to your opponent's shield, and then you have to make a choice. If you're winning the shield battle, you can either full commit to that, or you can do what Dan's about to do and try and halt someone out of cover or shield to get extra poke on them. Now you see Kid reloads behind cover, which is always good to do. Dan is out of ammo, but he reloads while everyone's out of cover. Replaces the shield in a better position. Starts shooting straight away. But they're both kind of equal on the shield. So here's the halt play. You halt them outside of where their shield will be, and hope they don't fortify. And when you pull them, you can get a bit of poke on them. In this case, he didn't do that much. But if you pull it off correctly, you can get about 30 hit points of damage. Kid tries the same thing, but Dan's anticipating it. Uses the tree as cover while his shield goes down, because using the halt play diminishes your shield on the your DPS on the enemy shield. So yours will go down first. But if you use the tree like Dan does, you can mitigate the damage. The problem is he didn't do much damage when he did the halt play. Now Dan is at a disadvantage for shielding. He'll have to try and make a play either behind cover or with a halt, which he tries to do. Gets a bit more poke that time. Halt so that Kid's halt, fortifies so that Kid's halt doesn't affect him as much. But the problem is Dan's committed so much time here to doing the halt play and hasn't got much dividends out of it that he is now losing the shield battle completely. And so he doesn't take cover behind the tree. He doesn't realise that his shield's going down. And so now Kid gets a lot of free poke on him. See, about 30 points worth of damage. That may not seem like much, but in the long run it does add up. Winston, there's not much to talk about except for just the tech, in which Dan knows it better. I've slowed down for one of these. He lands on Kid, as you can see by the hit marker. So when the jump comes up again, he punches in the air, you can see he gets damage on Kid when he lands. Kid does not do the same thing, and so Dan wins the Winston.
Score 3-2.
So on May, we have kind of a hard commit by both of them. So in a second, they'll meet each other here. Now, Dan knows that Kid's coming around the corner, and he pre-fires, which is good. So Kid actually takes the first tick of damage, which you'd think that would mean that Dan would freeze Kid first. Problem is, we're not perfect. Our aim isn't always good. And so you have to be watching the amount of ticks you take versus the amount of ticks the enemy take on the freeze. Because that would determine one of three possibilities you can pull off if you were on the losing side. If you're on the winning side, obviously you have to commit to doing the freezing. So you can see that Dan goes down to 168 here versus Kid's 179. And so usually it's about 165 on the freeze. But you can see visibly that Dan's health is half a bar underneath Kid's. Obviously you can't, in real time track both your health as you're doing these May 1v1s. But if you are on the losing side, and you can tell you're on the losing side, there's one of three things you can do. One is you can hard commit and icicle like secondary fire the enemy May, because if you hit 2 icicles and one is a headshot, you get them down to very low, and so out of self-defense they will icicle or wall. Second, and you can also kill them, by the way, if you get 2 headshots. So while they're committing to freezing, you can catch them off guard. Second is obviously icicle. Now this is not advised if they're standing right in front of you, because they'll start pre-firing the freeze as you unfreeze, and you will have limited options afterwards. Third option, which is usually the defensive safe option, is walling yourself. Problem with this is if you don't do it in an enclosed area, they can wall over your wall and continue to chase you. In this case, Dan, I guess, misjudged since he got the first tick, but he didn't get as many ticks afterwards that he would freeze first, and Kid gets the easy win.
Score 3-3. Battle Reinhardt.
So on Reinhardt, something I want to talk about is fire strikes and knowing when to engage. So you saw there, we skipped over it a bit, but Dan hit the first fire strike on Kid. Now you don't have to engage after the first fire strike. It is a bit risky if you get caught off by a charge, but it puts you at a very big advantage, especially if they've used their own fire strike on you. Dan opts for the safer option here though, which as you'll see in a second comes back to bite him, because Kid will get a fire strike on him, which Dan doesn't. Now Kid's just started his charge animation, and Dan can hear that, and so Dan goes straight into his charge to try and catch him out the door, which is a pretty good play, but just misses. Dan has the high ground, but Kid hits an excellent fire strike predicting the strafing from Dan. And now we're back to square one. So you can see in that instance, Dan should have just gone aggressive. We continue to try and get fire strike poke between them. Dan hits a second fire strike on Kid, and now alarm bells start ringing in Kid's head. He needs to go hyper aggressive and get some trades off Dan if he's going to win this. Not advised usually, but he does benefit off it, because you see Dan misses the first swing there, which means that Kid is now favoured as long as he hits a swing and a fire strike. Hits the swing. Dan misses another swing. They both charge, but Kid could have gotten another swing and a fire strike if he committed there and walked to the side. After the charges, Kid goes for the swing while Dan goes for the fire strike. So, benefits Dan in this trade. Until Kid hits that fire strike while getting knocked off by Dan's hammer. Remember, Reinhardt's hammer has knockback. So if you're engaging on a target that you think is low or will lose the fight to you, you've got to make sure not to knock them away from you, which is exactly what Dan's done here. Gives Kid some separation. And so now Dan is at the disadvantage. He knows that one fire strike, 100 damage, would take him out. So he's got to go on the offensive. Goes for a fire strike. Dodges the fire strike there. You can see he turns away from the wall and does a strafe. Kid goes in for a swing and misses. So Dan thinks to charge him off the edge. I know if Kid was jumping off for a reason here, but if he was, he baited him and got a swing while Dan was charging. You can do that. If you're to the side, you can always get a swing off on the enemy Ryan while they're charging for some free damage. And as well fire strike them when they hit the wall at the end and they're stuck in that animation. So Dan gets hit and he's on low health. Kid goes in for a charge and unfortunately misses, but look what happens now. This is about Ryan's hammer hitbox. It does have a hitbox, funnily enough. You have to be close to someone to hit them with the hammer. And when you're in the advantage, you can't play hit or miss with the hammer, basically. You have to go full send, as long as you know their charge is off cooldown. And so Kid hits the wall with his swing, while Dan gets the swing as Kid was recovering from his charge. Kid misses another swing, and Dan walks forward as he hits his. And that means Dan wins the round.
3-4.
And so going into the honor round, like I said, I talk about footsteps here. Black Forest, a hard map to hear footsteps on. The initial stages of honor are always about information gathering, because if you get caught off guard and slept, it's usually over for you, if the enemy knows what they're doing. And that's what both of these players do right now. Dan is camping, but again, let's be silent and listen to the background ambient noise. See, Dan checks underneath him because the water sounds like footsteps, and you're not sure. Kid is doing the same. He's scouting around. Neither of them see each other right now. Kid checks behind him every so often, which is good. Dan stays in the middle area, because right now they're just looking for that initial information. Send them over the edge. Now Dan doesn't check his behind here, which is scary, because if an honor flanks you while they're crouch walking, it can be over. They're both scouting, they're both scouting, they're both scouting. Now they see each other. And so Dan gets the first hit. Once you see each other, it then becomes the snipe out. But as you'll see in a second, we actually go into ability tech uses. So Kid hears the drop down from Dan there, and knows he's coming around.
30 seconds.
He checks this side, but then he hears him down on the left. So now he checks the side. Dan knows he's in this building. So now they both know where each other's located. And they actually sleep each other. And so once they get up, you can look at the placement here of the cursors. They're both looking straight at each other. And they're both on 195 HP. Although it doesn't serve that much in the long run, you always want to be able to grenade first. But you also want to hit a shot and a grenade. Since in this case, they're only they're the same HP, and it's only 5 HP you'd gain from healing first, it's not worth it. So what to do here is to place your cursor directly over the enemy and grenade, which is exactly what Dan does. Gets a shot, hits, does his grenade, and so now you can see it's 135 to 79. So now we go into just pure aim. They hit one shot on each other each. And so at this point, they're both one shot. And so you're really testing your aim here. And since your Bionade is on a 9-second cooldown, and your Sleep, which is on a 4-second cooldown, would not kill each other since Kid is on 9, you don't want to bother with the Sleep. You just want to bother on aiming here and angles. So they know where each other are. Dan knows that Kid is most likely going to go to the left here. Kid thinks he's going to go to the right. They're both right. But because of the angle that Kid is taking here, he doesn't know at what point Dan will be. You can see just over his scope, near the bushes. There's lots of different angles that Dan could be at. Dan, when he's looking around this corner, knows that Kid is going to swing round. And so you see that's what happens. See, Dan's crosshair is closer to Kid's crosshair than Kid's crosshair is to Dan. And Kid gets the win. Sorry, Dan gets the win. Pega Brain. But that does it for map 1 of Dan vs Kid VoD review. All in all, there was some good text shown in this map. And then the next map gets even crazier, so stay tuned for that.
Arriving at Eagle Point, Antarctica.
Okay, so we're on to map 2 of the Dan vs Kid series. And we start off on Doomfist here, which we didn't see in the previous map. So it's best of 3, remember? So this was a do or die situation for Kid. Right now they're both trying to get information. In a minute you'll see at the corner of their eyes they both see each other. So Dan goes in for the first slam. Usually you do not want to slam first because the enemy can punch you while you're locked in the animation. The enemy can uppercut you, or they can just shoot in the face. And you don't get much out of it. Somehow he lands on the lower level, and Kid, you can see Kid was charging his punch to try and catch him off guard in that situation. Doesn't work out. So now they both know where each other are. They kind of reset. They tried to punch down some stairs to see if the other one was going through. Neither of them were. So here you can see Kid cancelling his pulch to try and get a reaction out of Dan. Dan tries to get on the same level with his uppercut. Actually dodges some of the shotgun pellets. Misses his slam though because Kid slams away from it. Almost gets the 180. Kid uppercuts out of Dan's punch because that's the only ability Dan has left, so he knows he's going to use it. Kid tries to follow up with a punch, but didn't have the angles. The shotgun shots greatly favour Kid here, which means Dan is in a tough situation. He needs to hit these abilities to punish Kid, otherwise he's going to lose this fight. So again, you don't want to slam. Bad first move. Right now he could uppercut Kid, which would put them both at the same height and means that they could both shoot each other, but in that case it would favour Kid. Or what he could do right now is punch him. Since there's a 1-second cooldown on that uppercut, if you see an enemy Doom does not have an uppercut, 100% try and punch them. Because sometimes slam can't get them out the way, and Kid is right next to a wall here. Dan goes for the uppercut, which actually favours him quite a bit somehow. Gets the follow-up slam, charges his punch, but can't turn around to see where he is. Kid is right in front of him, gets the punch, and gets the finish. Started his beam when Kid was above 100 HP, but it was only about 112, so it quickly turned on the juice to burn him down. Back on Sigma. Again, I won't repeat what I said in the previous map, but there we can see shield placement. So right now, the shield war is actually favouring Kid because he drops his shield and absorbs, gets some extra shielding from it. Problem is, he doesn't put his shield out after he finishes absorbing, which leads to Dan getting a rock on him. So we're kind of back to even. Gets the overshields away. And Kid has a higher shield. Dan takes his shield back to try and recharge because he realizes he's losing the poke war. Kid charged his rock just as Dan was charging him. If you see a Sigma yeet through his shield towards you when you're behind your own shield, you can bet they're going to try a rock play. And if as soon as you see them charge out to their shield, you can charge up your rock at that exact moment because you have the shield advantage. They have to get in front of your shield to get that rock off. But you don't need that. Your shield allows your rock to go through it. I know this seems like a very basic concept, but it allows you to get the rock off first, which is important in Sigma 1v1s. And so that's what happens here.
Give me a moment to think.
As we continue, they poke each other. Dan's shield goes down first. He backs off. That's a good thing to do. Kid follows, but doesn't really commit to it, which allows Dan's shields to get up. And now Dan is actually favoured in the engage.
30 seconds remaining.
Dan takes the high ground, which isn't as big on Sigma as you think it would be, since you can alter the shield direction. Missed rock from Dan means he can't go aggressive for a while, so it just results to poke. Both absorb, get nothing out of it, but Dan makes the right decision and does his rock straight after they both absorb, because Kid isn't quick on his shield. Kid stuns Dan back because his shield isn't out.
Observe the barrier.
Capture the objective to win.
And so the added poke just makes it easier for Kid to win.
2. Battle. 3. Fight.
Now, Brigitte. I'm not going to claim to be a Brig expert here, but key part of this is hitting your flare whip and pushing off the advantage. Actually kind of similar to Ryan. You see they both hit the flare whip, so they both heal back up to full. To reset. Now, Dan hits the first flail whip that Kid doesn't, which means he's at an advantage here. As soon as you're on advantage on Brig, and you see they've missed the flail whip, you should push, exactly like Reinhardt, because you are better in the neutral game. And so, Kid actually pushes back, which would work if he hit the stun, but Dan actually stuns him first, which means Dan gets some free poke, gets stunned back, but at this point, Dan has the health advantage of about 50. They both flow whip each other. So Dan's going to go back up to more health. And also, that armor being there means that Dan takes slightly less damage from a mace that Kid does. Won't mean much in the long run, but gets another flare whip and stuns Kid when he knows Kid is going to go for the, let's say, clap back on the flare whip, which means that now Dan is at 250 while Kid's at 50, and it's a guaranteed win.
You might want to
Score. 2-2.
So on Brig, you really want to be checking flail whip and whether you should be aggressive or defensive.
Fight.
Ryan, we've already talked about. Fire strike, aggressive versus passive. Speed this up a bit. So right now, Dan does something clever. He hears that Kid is coming around the corner, so tries to get a pre-fire charge on him. It doesn't work out, but he's very close to pulling it off, and that would basically secure you the round. Kid tries to clap back, but Dan is already aware and backs off. And so Dan does exactly what I was talking about and gets the fire strike while Kid's locked in the charge animation, puts him at the advantage. And then from there, it's a straight roll. And Kid wins, Dan wins because he committed to the smack tournament. Now in that situation, Kid would have won if they were both even, because getting a hammer into fire strike cancel actually does more DPS. Dan gets poke on the shield while Kid's not using it. Always a good idea. Any little helps. Now we're on the point. Kid places his shield first, but actually has the advantage in the shield poke war. And since we're on the point and we have to commit, that greatly benefits Kid. If you think or know that you're going to be at a shield disadvantage and we have a point scenario, you've got to use any physical cover you can, otherwise you're about to get rolled. So on eco point, we have the middle statue, the middle pillar, I guess, which Dan could have used. He uses Fortify, though, straight out of his shield breaking, which is a good idea, and aims directly for the head, of course. Kid basically loses this one, at least in the poke war, because he's not aiming for the head. But then, a critical error from Dan. He doesn't commit to shooting Kid in the head, keep on with his gun, because he thinks if he places his shield down, he'll get a guaranteed win. Unfortunately, in those ticks that it takes you, those frames that it takes you to look down and place your shield, you are still getting hit in the head by another Orisa, which means if it's close and you're both low, you're going to die in that instance, which is what happens here.
Score 3-4.
And now we go on to Moira, the last infamous round of this game. Kept Kid in the series. So let's see what happens. They both lock onto each other. Kid places the damage orb as an aggressive strategy to try and kill Dan fast. Usually on Moira, the strat is obviously a healing orb to follow you around as you walk to make sure that you're always topped up and you're getting damage on your opponent. In this case, the damage orb actually works out because it's an enclosed area and he gets very lucky bounces. You can see the damage orb in the background on the left there. I'll slow it down. Kid is lower in this case, but then the damage orb comes back to hurt Dan enough to give Kid the W. So healing orb versus damage orb, only do the damage orb if you know it's going to hit them for most of the duration, i.e. their fade is down or they don't have coalescence. Otherwise, use healing orb. In this case, Kid gets lucky and we go to a map 3. So catch you on Necropolis in a moment. And so now we get to the third map of Necropolis, in which Dan kind of pulled away from Kid. It was his map pick, so maybe he had a set strategy coming in. It was his home map also. We start off with Ryan here. Same old, same old. Kid gets the first fire strike, which would put him at the advantage. Dodges the fire... Oh, actually does not dodge the fire strike of Dan. He almost would have. He backed around the corner well enough, but he gets caught off slightly because he goes too far forward. Kid charges, but hits the left lip of the wall, which means he goes in the wrong direction, which means Dan is now in the position to push this aggressively, which he does. Gets the first hit, burst, hits the fire strike on the reset, which means he wins. He's on 40 health more than Kid. Just about. It's because he got that first hit and did the fire strike reset.
Battle made.
Back onto Mei, which Kid has won twice in this series already. They can hear each other. Sometimes information is key as Mei because you can pre-fire a wall. Kid tries to do because he expects Dan to be on the opposite side of that wall there. They hit the icicles on each other. And you see, because of the icicles, Dan forces Kid to go into the ice block first. And so he sees the ice block cooldown and goes, maybe I can pre-fire this. And does exactly that. Because he knows that also, Kid's wall is on cooldown. And so he gets the win on Mei. Because he tracks the cooldowns and pre-fires the ice block by baiting it out.
To 0. Match point.
And so I can't imagine what it must feel like to have to try and reverse sweep to win. Going 4-0 down is probably a really rough situation. But Kid goes for the ground pound first. That's a no-no. Because look at that. He takes 120 damage, almost, to the face. Because Dan was just spraying him down as he basically ground pounds nothing. Dan baits out the charge. Kid baits out his charge too. Dan almost goes around the corner and gets a ground pound slam. Not quite. Punches her back up so they don't engage on each other. The shotgun poke starts, which of course Dan wins. Kid goes for the ground pound first, which Dan just uppercuts and then shoots him in the head to win. Moral of the story, don't ground pound first in a Doomfist 1v1. But that's it for this VoD review. You can see that Dan used just some techs and some mental games to really dominate Kid in the third map. I hope this has been helpful for you guys. Let me know if you have any suggestions for future VoD reviews, or what I could do better to explain myself, or explain to you guys some of the techs you could use to improve in your 1v1s. That should be it for now. I'll catch you in the next video. See you later, guys.